to the fact that we do not know where these men have been laid to rest in the Oregon City area. And it is an opportunity for us to help educate the citizenry that this is an ongoing quest that we have, and perhaps invite their support. These are the names. We're working on the diacritical remarks to make sure that we can convey them in a way that they stay intact. But these are the Indian names of the 5 men that are buried somewhere in the vicinity. And these 5 men, just for information's sake, are not only brothers but cousins. So when 3 of these men were older brothers to a young man who was the remaining survivor of the family after these men were hanged, and who was a head man at the Treaty Council of 1855. And 2 of them were cousins to those brothers. And so the hanging of these 5 men was not only a travesty, but a huge historical and long-term impact on one particular family here. And so it's important for me to note the descendants of these families, the men who carry these names, like Cleoma Samkin, which is Cougar Shirt. We have a man who descends from this family who carries that name, who will turn 90 in October. And he is very much excited about getting this project achieved to honor his ancestor. One of the men who's been consulted who's a linguistic scholar, also comes from this family and has a PhD in anthropology in Arizona and is a descendant of the same family. And one of our local religious leaders here on the reservation also descends from this family. So these 5 men came from a prominent family, and that family is still very prominent on our reservation today. And so there's a lot of attention being paid to our ability to succeed with this project. And then this is the draft text that has been showed and shared with the Confederate Tribes of Grand Ronde, talking about the generic or the general history about what happened in 1847 when a measles epidemic swept through our homeland, and the consequence of killing the Whitmans, and then a period of sort of unmitigated warfare took place in the Oregon Territory it wasn't actually the Oregon Territory yet, in this part of the country. And then territorial government was established in 1848. And these men were seized long before Oregon's statehood. And because they were accompanied by other headmen of our tribe, as well as some Nez Perce men, the judge took it upon himself to inform most of the people at the trial that by virtue of them being given up by their own people, that the assumption of guilt was not far off. Easy to conclude. Although that is not actually what happened from our perspective, that is what happened from the judicial perspective. And so they were all found guilty, and the trial was about 2 days. And then they had to wait in Oregon City from the end of the trial till June 3rd to be hanged, because they had to get enough lumber amassed to be able to build not only the scaffold to hang 5 men at the same time, but to also construct caskets or boxes for their 5 bodies. And so that work was then achieved, and all of them were hanged in that location that was in that sketch in 1850 on June 3rd. And there is one book that has been published about specifically this Oregon City judicial event, written by now deceased Dr. Ronald Lansing, who was one of the founding professors of law at the Lewis and Clark Northwestern College of Law. And it's called Juggernaut, but it is no longer available in print. You can find it through used online bookstores, most typically. That is one of the most reliable sources of bibliographic as well as interpretive text on this subject. So I thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you so much.
I'm sorry, Chair. Would it be okay if I answer Commissioner or Board Member Powell answer the question? So, Board Member Powell, I do not see any utility infrastructure within this area. There is some irrigation valves. And we would be talking with the Parks Department about that. I also note that there is some underground electrical power that feeds the street or feeds the park lights that are along the promenade. And we note that within our designs.
Okay, well, that must have been what I saw. That must have been the vault for the electrical that I saw, because I did see when I was there, I noticed that the sprinkler system, and these were all on the mirror. That answers my question. Thank you.
You're welcome. And Christina, would you want me to share a couple photos of the materials that we're thinking about?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So I'm going to share. So in general, the basalt boulder that we're talking about when we talk about the design it will be a 6-inch boulder that is very in kind of the existing promenade boulders. And these are other photos commemorating the location. In general, the location that has been agreed upon is within this area, and it will be more of a rock compacted gravel path. It's the same type of path that you might see out at Newell Creek Canyon or something like the old Kenema Park path up in the metro area. It is a compacted granite that is pervious and should allow for infiltration to the tree roots that are present. And also the design is ADA compliant, or the design will be ADA compliant and will allow for drainage to ensure that the area contouring and everything like that is fairly in kind. Thanks, Christina.
Oh, thank you.
Any other questions for city staff or design staff? Thoughts? Okay. Thank you, guys. Thank you for your time.
All right. So, real quickly, the McLoughlin Promenade has really been a place from time immemorial where people have passed through, and really, it's this 1936 structure that brings us all here today. But on a staff level, there is space and place to put, very compatible tributes on the back end of the promenade in really many different locations as it relates to the structure. And so I know Dante and his team are working really hard to address the arborist report, but I think I just want to, again, key to the board that any one tree is not significant as regards to adversely affecting the resource. So that's kind of your historic review board hat, though Dante has a lot of hats on, working with, Parks and Rec and utilities, infrastructure, and coordinating with different tribes and looking at tree health and trying to work with City Commission. What your task is when it comes in September is really looking at how does it affect the resource that you regulate as the board. So With that, I think there's a request to continue to the September 26th Historic Review Board meeting.
I would move to continue to a date certain of September 26th.
Second that.
Okay. Lots of seconds. Board Member Green?
Aye.
Board Member Stobie?
Aye.
Board Member Powell?
Aye.
And Chair Ferry?
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. See you in September.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. We will now open the record for, I don't see a number on here, Christina.
Oh, sure. It is GLUA 2325 and HR 2308.
The applicant is requesting to use a metal cable railing on a rear deck replacement, which cannot be approved on a staff level. It's the Annie Park House at 1315 JQ Adams Street.
All right. If the board wants to go over site visits, I do know that Board Member Green has one and any conflict of interest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I will now ask each board member if they've had any ex parte contacts, conflicts of interest, bias, or any other statements to declare. Board Member Powell.
I was at a McLoughlin Neighborhood Steering Committee meeting when this application came forward. There was really no discussion about it at that point. They just brought it up as a land use action that we needed to review, but I was there at that time. That is my conflict, and I have also made a site visit.
Board Member Green.
Yeah, I visited the site and actually coincidentally was doing yard work in the neighboring residence or last week. So I did take a photo from that vantage point and forwarded that to Christina. Other than that, no ex parte contact or conflict of interest.
As you visit the site, and I can put the photo on the screen when I do the presentation, was there anything you remarked when you were looking at the property that, as you were taking the photo, just so you can share your recollections with the board?
Just basically, and I think from the photo, they'll see that there's, I think, about a 6-foot fence separating the property, and because of the height of that deck, you would see the rail and probably would barely see the deck itself from that vantage point. I mean, that yard slopes, and I guess it's about in the middle of the backyard. As you got closer to the fence, that would change a little bit, but you would see it to that extent from that neighboring property. But I did look from the sidewalk area, and the other board members that visited probably did the same thing. I don't see where you could see it at all. So it was just specifically that one vantage point.
Okay, thank you.
Board Member Stobie.
I have visited the site. However, I haven't had any ex parte contact. I don't have any conflicts of interest.
And I have no ex parte contact, no conflicts of interest, and I have visited the site. So we'll turn it over to Christina for a staff report.
All right. So just let the applicant Kim Sparks is here this evening. Kim, I will do a presentation and provide a little overview of the staff report, and then you can provide a little background and anything you want to add to my presentation, or anything, any additional information you think would be something the board would be useful in your decision making. Just so the board knows, Kim Sparks sent me some additional material information today that I sent by email, and I can forward that as well. I mean, I can put that up on the screen if the board wants. But I'm going to start my presentation. Just one moment. Okay. So once again, this is a request for a material that's not allowed under Policy 11 for decks in the historic review. Decks for designated properties in the McLoughlin Conservation District. And so if a property owner wants to add a deck and they meet the historic review board policies, they do not need to get additional review from the board. They can just move forward and build it and get building permits as needed. So in this situation, the applicant came in and provided a request for a deck with railings that were not allowed, and so that is why it is in front of you this evening. So let me start my second. Okay, can everyone see? Okay. So this property is located at 1315 JQ Adams. There's the Annie Park House. So this is a view of the house from the street and site location. So the Historic Review Board Policy 11 on decks and porches provide really specific criteria of when a porch or a deck can be built with a staff level and building permit process approval. And in this situation, the applicant has proposed a non-approved material, which is metal cable stay railings, and they are not identified as a permitted material. Usually, if you come in with a wood railing, we'll approve you through and have Trex decking on the rear of your house will allow you to move forward. So I'm going to move this real quickly. Apologies. So one of the big goals of the Historic Review Board policies was to help property owners kind of do all the day-to-day and kind of small projects that all property owners do to maintain and improve their house, and allowing really, in a sense, smaller stuff to stay on a staff level and more complicated or balancing of items to be at a public hearing. And so the board went through and created those policies in '86, and they were just refined a couple years ago to provide a lot more detail. And so when there is a request from an applicant to propose a material that's not allowed by the Historic Review policies, it doesn't necessarily mean the board can't approve it, but now you're looking at context sensitive, you're looking at the specific proposal, you're looking about to see if it adversely affects the resource. And so in your analysis tonight, you're really looking at this proposal. You're not looking at, should we be changing policy 11? Like in this particular instance, has the applicant met the threshold of showing that this is a compatible proposal? So as always, you're looking at that balance between compatible design and, as an addition, being differentiated from the historic building. So I do not have a recommendation as staff. I'm really providing you, as you read the staff report, really kind of two sets of findings and then really a process direction. So there's really kind of two ways you could look at this proposal. One would be the simple cable railings differentiate the deck from the house and are designed to visually recede into the background. The lack of view from pedestrians and other historic resources also reduces the impact the deck has on the significance of the district. That could be your finding if you find that the cable railings in this situation are kind of small in nature and reduce the massing. You could also through your analysis find that the cable railings are too incompatible with the 1907 house and create too much of a contemporary element on a relatively large raised deck, regardless of what can be seen from the street. Both are perfectly reasonable findings for the board to have. So as you do your analysis, those are kind of the two different ways you could be looking at this proposal. If you, in your deliberations, if you are moving to allow the application of the proposal with your findings, I'd appreciate any additional direction you can provide staff for the next application that comes in. So if this is context sensitive, if this was allowed because of this particular proposal, you can let staff know when another applicant comes in, to kind of explain how their project may be different than this one, or maybe they also may have the same context issue. So once again, you're not changing the policy, you're providing extra review at a notice public hearing, rather than just allowing something through the building permit process through a clear and objective criteria. So there's really, in those two findings, you have really a motion to deny the application because you find that the criteria, that the proposal does create too much of a massing and an element. And then you would move to deny and really direct the applicant to return to a staff level to propose deck railings that meet HRB policy 11 through the building permit process. If you approve it with conditions, you find that the metal railing does not adversely impact the resource and is located at the rear of the building, is blocked the neighbors, and such and such. And the conditions of approval really are just the remainder of HRB policy 11. So you're basically saying, we are allowing the cable to be different, but you still need to build your deck that meets the rest of policy 11. So the conditions really are just a numbering of the details of HRB policy 11. So it's deny, send back to the building permit, approve with conditions, and direct the applicant to build the rest of the structure meeting HRB policy 11 on decks and porches. And so these are the 6 criteria that came straight from the HRB policies. So to provide a little context, this is from the inventory form. This is the Annie Park House. It's a 1907. It's kind of right where vernacular starts to meet bungalow, but it's still vernacular. It's located at J.Q. Adams. There's 2 other historic resources near them. We have the Dr. H.R. Nirbus house, which is kind of behind them. So I asked the applicant to send some additional photos showing the rear property, and that came into an email from you, I believe, on Friday, which shows a pretty strong tree canopy in the back, kind of behind where the red star is. But if you looked at board member Green's photo from the backyard at 1305, looking towards 1315, you can definitely see you would be able to see the deck from that non-designated structure. The other structure at really the intersection there at 1303 J.Q. Adams is the Margaret King House, and topography-wise, it's much higher, and it's really blocked from the back of the view because of topography. It's much farther. 1315 is much farther down the hill. 1303 is kind of the top of that intersection. Everything is kind of moving south in both directions. So here's some more photos of the front yard looking towards the back. Kind of see the heavy tree canopy in the back. This is in the rear of the house, looking towards the back of the, this is at the property line, looking toward the back of the house. Again, these is kind of the large tree canopy looking towards the property line from the back of the house. This is showing the existing deck they're removing or replacing. Staff was unable to ascertain if it was the exact footprint, but it's pretty close to the exact footprint of the existing deck. This proposal shows as the applicant's proposal. I think the stair configuration is slightly different. This shows the applicant's proposal. You are allowed to use TimberTech decking on the rear of the house of a deck with the HRB policies. It is really the cable railings that they're asking for this evening. This is an example of that cable railing, and then the truck decking you see below, which is of course approved by HRB policy. And so really you have your options this evening is to approve the proposal, adopt the findings that are associated with your opinion, and approve with conditions. You can approve the proposal with modified conditions if you think there are additional conditions that are needed in order for you to approve this proposal and provide those additional findings. deny the proposal and adopt the associated findings for the denial, or continue the hearing to request more information. And I am going to stop sharing for just a moment, and I'm going to show the photo that Board Member Green sent me. So 1 second. Just 1 moment. Let me get back. Excuse me. Okay. Can everyone see that? That is showing, that's the photo that Board Member Green sent me, showing the property next door looking at the backyard. Can everyone see that photo?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I'll stop sharing. And so that's all I have for my presentation. The property owner is here, but if the board can ask any questions before we send it over to the property owner.
Does anyone have any questions for staff? For Christina?
Oh, I just realized my camera's off. Thank you.
Christina, I have a question as it relates to the timber tech. I noticed in the documentation that it says it is allowable for decks 50 years that aren't 50 years or older. What is how is that defined?
It's basically saying you can't take a historic porch and put timber tech on it. But if you're going to build a new like a new deck, or you're going to replace a deck that really is not integral to the architecture of the house. So 50 years old or older, you're saying you're going to start taking a look and say, maybe this deck or porch is now gained significance to the resource. Something that is 50 years or younger is just not. So adding a timber tech really is adding a contemporary material that weathers much better in our Oregon climate that is not part of the historic structure.
Okay. Thank you.
No questions from me.
All right, hearing no more questions, we'll move on to the public testimony. As a reminder, the applicant will speak first. They will have 15 minutes to describe their application, 5 minutes for representatives of organized neighborhood associations or government agencies or other incorporated public interest organizations, 3 minutes for individuals, and 5 minutes for an applicant's rebuttal. So I invite the applicant to speak,
Yes.
and you have 15 minutes.
Yes, hello. Can you hear me?
You can,
Yes.
Kim. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, hello. My name's Kim Sparks. I'm the owner of the property. I'd like to just start with the owner of the property that I believe board member Green took the picture from, the 1305. We do know her, Ingrid. We're friends with her, and to our knowledge, she nor any of our neighbors have any issue with our design, including the cable. Although we understand that cable was not an available resource back when the home was built, because of the aesthetics of it, we feel that we can get the railing that the cable is going to attach to. That can come in many different colors, including gray. We were told this by our designer. And we believe that with the cable and the gray railing, that the view of the deck will essentially just disappear. It will not adversely affect the structure or aesthetics. I think that was really my only point. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Do any board members have questions for the applicant?
I have a question. Ms. Sparks, I'm wondering have you, in your process, did you identify, or at least did you look at any other types of railings? I mean, cable, I understand. There are lots of different types of cable. I'm just curious if you looked at anything else.
Well, my husband specifically wanted the cable. As far as types of cable, we did go to Par Lumber ourselves and look through their inventory, and between that and our designer Jorge, we let him decide what will be the best size of cable and type of cable for the structure.
Okay. And so you looked at different sized railings, for instance, along with that cable?
Sir. Yes,
okay.
Sir.
And that his choice of the larger railing was for a particular reason, or did he pass that on to you?
Yes, I believe it was. We're doing the length out from the house is going to be 18 feet, and so he was going to do it in 3 6-foot sections, and that structurally that size would fit with that length. I hope I'm making sense.
No, yeah, that makes sense. That I was wondering if that was his concern with structure, and if a thinner, with your idea that you're going to disappear into the, disappear from view, perhaps a thinner railing or a thinner post would be good, but you'd have to have more of them. And I'm just wondering if that was looked at all as an opportunity, because I think that could possibly disappear equally as well. That's my question. Thank you.
Are there any other questions for the applicant? No? I just have one question. You mentioned that you're looking at the gray color, because I see in the email that was sent to Christina with some different examples. There's a couple different examples shown in different colors. Is it possibly the first picture with the lighter gray railing that you're considering?
Yes. I don't know. I don't have an example or know the exact shade, but our thinking was that the cable itself is inherently a gray color, and that we would try to match that as closely as we could to, of course, go with the whole disappearing, invisible kind of aesthetic.
Okay, great, thank you.
So I'd like to just confirm with Ms. Sparks on Tim's questions. I think he was alluding to, but I'll directly ask. In your process, in your research with Jorge and your husband, did you review the HRB policy 11 to look at the material and types of railing that would satisfy the policy and allow staff to approve it at staff level, or have you had time to do that?
Yes, we have. And we felt that we were really excited about our design, and we wanted to take the time to present it to you. We do understand all of the rules and have read everything that's been sent to us by Christina and everything we've received.
Okay, thank you.
Would it be helpful for the board? I can do the share the screen of today's email that shows that materials.
That'd be great.
Okay. Let's see.
I just like to say these were examples that I found online. So colors are not, unnecessarily applicable, just the overall view of the vertical cable.
And this is the railing design, because if you scroll down, there's another railing design that has sort of a ball on the top. Yeah, those. Were you thinking about just sort of the little pyramidal cap that goes on top?
Yes. Maybe I gave you too many different examples there, but yeah, the simpler design, the first one is more like what we were thinking of.
Thank you.
Okay. Is there anything else on the email you want me to scroll down to for the board? If not, I'll stop sharing.
No, as far as I'm concerned, I think that's
okay.
The question. Great. Do we have any more questions? If not, do we have any public comments?
We don't have any public comments, and I received no comment from the McLoughlin Neighborhood Association.
Okay. So we will now move into board deliberations. We'll go around the board for initial thoughts. Let's start with, Board Member Powell.
Thank you. I am a little concerned that it looks a little too modern. And the fact that regardless of whether you can see it from the street, I still think it looks too modern. I'm okay. I would like to see a smaller post. I think that would fit in better. From the view that I saw looking out across that, I looked at it from the street. I just think with the timber tech and the those type of railings, the cable railings, it just seems to me it's just a little too modern for a 1907 home. Color was an issue because I was looking at black and I thought black was the choice. I'm happy to hear that is not the choice. I think if this goes further, the gray would be a much better choice for our environment. But at this point, I'm a little concerned about that, and I'm not sure if I'd like to hear the rest of the board's thoughts. But I would like to see. I'm not really worried about the massing with a wood railing or a different type of, or even a timber tech railing, if that's such a thing. I'd have to see that. But it seems to me, it just seems to me to just be a little too modern in that very old neighborhood. And I'd hate to start something like that in an older neighborhood that we can't control. And I know Christina said that it could be a one-off type situation if we had a reason for it. But whenever it goes one time, it becomes a battle later on. That's my comment for the moment.
Board Member Green.
I concur with Board Member Powell. I mean, that clearly is creates a modern appearance. I guess as I had contemplated it though, I see the fact that it just simply cannot be seen from any public vantage point, nor will it ever be seen from a public vantage point, even if vegetation changes, as far as I can tell, because the garage would screen that view from the right hand side as you face the building, and on the left hand side, I think it's inset enough that the house itself would screen the view. So I think it's completely screened from public view, which I think would be important with that. I concur that we don't want to set a precedent of just mixing, you might say, a modern style. However, a 20 by 20 deck clearly is not part of the original building. I think that would be apparent to anybody evaluating it. It would be undoubtedly the deck that it's replacing it is less than 50 years old. So there's a distinction there. So I'm kind of going back to some of the stuff we discussed at our camp presentation, and where clearly distinct from original construction, stylistically different, is not necessarily inappropriate, and there's some boundaries to that, of course. But I guess I'm find myself more supportive of it because it is completely screened from public view. The other piece of it, it does fall in the category of being removable. So as you might say, permanent modification of a historic resource, it's not, because it's removable. But there is certainly a concern of setting a precedent. But I think the fact that it's completely obscured mitigates that enough in my case that I don't have too much struggle with it.
Thank you. Board Member Stobie?
I think the material. I don't believe that policy number 11 was looked at seriously. Listening to Ms. Parr's response, I got the impression that this is the way we wanted to go originally, so this is what we looked at. And I don't know if all the homework's been done to look at the different materials that would comply with policy number 11. I agree with Board Member Green where, yeah, it's not permanent. It can be removed. It may not be seen from any vantage point. But at the same time, Green and Board Member Powell both state, and I agree that I'm hesitant on wanting to set a precedent to where future applications will lead to bigger issues protecting the integrity of the neighborhood and the historic resource. So I'd like to see more. I'm on the fence, so I'd be in favor of continuing the hearing another month to see what else could be presented.
Okay. So when I looked at it, I thought that it actually, in some ways, is slightly in line with policy 11 in that the first one, it says, porch and deck railing shall utilize vertical balustrades and top and bottom rails. And they should be attached between the rails, not to the front of the rails. So to me, really, although it's metal, it sort of fits the style of something that we would permit. the thing that is different, obviously, is the metal cables that are running back and forth as opposed to something that's a little bit more solid. It says wood decks and porches shall be painted to match the color of the designated structure. So really choosing a color for that metal is something that we would allow. And I like the lighter color better than the black color. I think it just looked a little less harsh. And then I couldn't see it at all from the street. So, and I don't think it's, obviously it's not a permanent alteration to the house, and it's not affecting any historical materials. So, I don't know if it's that different from what we would allow. It says aluminum rails on porches and decks are not permitted. It gives examples of wood in HRB policy 11. Do we allow for other metal materials, or no? It's all
no. Yeah, if it was not wood, or I guess a Trex one, it would be sent up to the board for contextual review.
I see. Okay. So it is by being metal in its entirety, it is something that is different. Yeah. I don't know. I think I'm kind of mixed in my thoughts about it. The fact that it's not visible at all. I do not want to set a precedent, but I also don't. I do think it could be possibly approved on a one-off if the board agreed. That's my thoughts.
One, as I'm grappling with it mentally and thinking about what would technically meet measure 11, if the metal railing does not, but a timber tech railing, at least of the appropriate configuration, would. So the timber tech railing would typically have a top and bottom rail, and it's going to have balusters that are probably about 1 inch square. So you think of a progression, I guess, mentally, the proximity of viewing, or the proximity, you might say, of the public being able to touch it. On the front, I think it'd be kind of a no-brainer. I think we would all agree that it would not be appropriate. A deck on the side that sits farther back, if an applicant was looking for a metal railing, they would have to come to us and make a case for why the metal would be more appropriate than timber tech, but they could appear to the public relatively similar, let's say on a deck on the side that's visible, but quite a ways back from the street. So you then you might say, justify, okay, the metal, if they could make a case for it, if it had the vertical balusters, and it may have, in that case, balusters that are only a half inch square, let's say, rather than 1 inch square. If the intent is to try to make the rail less prominent, the smaller balusters would. So you can kind of see a progression of argument as it now moves out of the public view. You still have the vertical element of the balusters, and there is, with the vertical cable rails, I think you can see it in the samples, but there's stiffeners, so there is like about a half inch square baluster about every 2 feet. to keep the rail, to keep those cable rails taut. So you have that element there anyway. So it's kind of step by step progressed, but it has moved completely out of the public view in this case. So yeah, it's an interesting one.
Well, I'd like to say that I think it would be nice to be able to visualize what you were just talking about. I'd like to be able to look at that and see if that would be a better solution, or at least an acceptable solution to the homeowner and to us. And whether a timber tack with smaller, pieces in there, like half-inch or whatever, would be good. I'd like, that's what I think it. I'd be okay with continuing this until we could actually see if we could look at that and see if maybe we could put something together that would make more sense. But as I see it now, regardless of whether you see it or not, that's my big concern, because what happens on the front of the house, as we saw in a recent presentation, it looks perfectly normal, but on the backside, it could look like anything. And that concerns me. By allowing that to happen, that concerns me. So that's why I don't want to set that precedent. And that, I guess that's just kind of the underlying issue for me, is setting that precedent with a metal, with, timber tech and metal and all that. But again, I'd be open to continuation if we could see maybe the results of a different design, that kind of like what you were talking about.
So I guess I got a question maybe for Christina. The timber tech rail that would be approved at staff level, with basically resin post sleeves, resin top and bottom rails, and typically would have like resin balusters in 1-inch square or something like that. But they do have those available with metal balusters that would be smaller. It may not be TimberTech brand, but some of the rail manufacturers do have a composite top bottom rail post sleeves with the smaller metal balusters. Would that push it back to HRB review with just the metal balusters?
Yeah. Actually, I've read that pretty strict, and I actually had an applicant who was interested in the metal balusters, and I indicated that would need to go in front of the board, and they looked at the resin balusters and the metal balusters, and they ended up just going with the resin. For them, it met their needs, and they didn't want to have to go to the board. But yeah, what on my board, on my levels for staff review, is provided, I can do a TimberTech resin, decking and railings. And so I'm looking at materiality of those two pieces.
So the TimberTech rail with the resin balusters basically is a staff approval then. Yeah. Okay.
And so if, let me clarify what you're asking the applicant to do, because a TimberTech resin railing is allowed on a staff level.
Yeah.
Are you needing to see that to compare that to the proposal? Is that what the board needs? Because if the applicant went with that, then then they wouldn't need board approval. But if they wanted to pursue it's the cable that they'll need board approval for. So are you needing to see a picture of what a resin TimberTech railing would be to be able to compare and contrast that? Is that the question?
I don't think so. I've seen those. They look pretty standard. It's the materials. It's going to be on the floor. It's fine. I guess my thought is by having the applicant look at that, that kind of to board member Stobie's concern that wasn't reviewed. I think that would do that, and I think that if they would look at that as part of their application, and if that was something that they felt that they were okay with, then they could go and get it approved by staff.
Yeah,
and it wouldn't have to come back to us.
Sure, and I'll answer for the applicant, but I can let them speak. I did have this conversation with the applicant, and they wanted to pursue the metal railing rather than the timber deck. They felt that it was a better approach to their deck, so that's why they're here this evening.
Board Member Stovey, were you about to say something? I might not.
Christina answered it. I was going to ask if we could ask Ms. Sparks if that was something she would consider.
Yeah, you can. Yeah.
But Christina answered saying that she already approached her. So
yes, it's definitely something we would consider. We have considered, just to be honest, my husband does favor the cable design, but in thinking it all the way through, he and I feel that if we have resin balusters versus metal, that the cable itself, again, you wouldn't be able to see really from any vantage point at all. I'm done. Thank you.
Sure. So if the applicant wants to propose a resin deck, resin railings with cable balusters, they can do that at a September meeting, Kim, if that's something you want to look at. But basically, anytime you have metal or cable in the balusters, it's gonna that design's gonna have to go to the board.
Yeah, and I'm not sure metal balusters, cable balusters would. I'm not even sure if that would pass building permit. You know, for security, I'm not sure. Vertically versus horizontally, so I don't know that.
I think they do. We've used them different times on projects, so I think they are code approved for the building department. Actually, as you mentioned it, earlier on when they started introducing cable rails, more commonly you would see those as horizontal, and that's a very modern look. And I would be opposed to that. I don't quite have the struggle with the vertical ones, but part of the issue with the horizontal ones was they became a kind of a attractive climbing thing for children. So they presented something of a hazard of their own, and the vertical cable rails address that. You don't have that. And also, you know, if they were climbed on, they start stretching and sagging. So the vertical cable rails came along a little bit subsequent to the earlier cable rails, but any of the systems that are furnished as a system have generally, TimberTech certainly has got code approval, and most of the manufacturers do have code approval, so that part would work. So I think it's basically just our the appearance consideration, and yeah, it's puppy. It clearly is more modern looking. I guess the question that we've got to deliberate is in this case, would it be acceptable or not? I don't know. Chair Perry, any further thoughts from you? I mean,
I think that I would most likely be okay with it. But it seems like there are other board members who feel that it is not an acceptable material on a historic structure. And I can understand that perspective as well. So The only reason I think I would be approving of it is that it has the top and bottom rail with the vertical cables, and that it's completely not visible from anywhere that I could tell as far as my looking. So that's the only sort of reason I would.
So we're kind of coming down 2 and 2. It sounds like what would be a good path to proceed here?
Well, if you approve it, you need to give Christina the reasons, and so that if another application comes up, then she'll have some justification for why this was approved, and that is where my concern lies, is because we are setting a precedent, and and I know we're only dealing with this right now, and that's what I'm trying to do, but I'm also looking towards the reasons we give for approval if that's in fact what happens. So that is an outstanding concern for me, and not easily changed for me.
And I'll add that historically, when we've made these one-off decisions, it's because applicants have done due diligence. We mitigated risk, whether it was with the application or whether it's setting that precedent. I mean, with this, it's my hang up is it's not approved for metal. And it's not like there are not other materials that are out there. It's not yeah, that's where I'm hung up on, is mainly it's the wrong material.
Into that, I concur with Board Member Scobie in that the other option, of course, the timber tech rail being an option that would be approved. If the only option was wood, you could make a case for, you might say, a downstream maintenance and protecting the resource and so forth. But the cable rail and the resin rail should be relatively equivalent in that regard. So in other words, is there further compelling reason to stray from what's approved? And I guess it's just simply a personal preference. So we do have to be careful about setting a precedent for sure. I mean, I guess clearly I concur with Board Member Powell that if it were to be approved, it would be made very clear that this application simply cannot at the present or would in the future reasonably be viewed anywhere from the public. But that in itself does set something of a precedent. So.
Just real quickly, Carrie Richter, our Deputy State Attorney, had a question or comment.
Thank you. I just wanted to provide a little more guidance, perhaps. Sounded to me from Board Member Powell's comments that perhaps he wanted to see some different gauges and some different colors. And I don't know if the applicant is willing to engage in that sort of alternative effort. And I think that goes to Board Member Green's comments about more narrow posts and sort of what the look of that would be, whether or not a thicker gauge would give more of a look of a 1/2-inch post, or a more narrow gauge would disappear. I'm not sure if disappearing would be more or less consistent with the policy that seems to require vertical baluster. So, but I think that if the board is interested in seeing alternatives, you could identify some alternatives. I mean, you could compare it to a timber tech baluster if you wanted the applicant to provide you an image of that, so that you could sort of view it on a spectrum of very modern to more appropriately historic. That might be a way forward, and then the applicant could decide if they want to provide those alternatives to the board. Or another alternative would be for someone to make a motion and to provide their rationale and to take a vote. Thank you.
Thanks, Carrie. Well, here's my concern about looking at different designs, if you will. It sounds to me that the applicant has that this is the design they like. This is the design they want to go with. Now they know they knew before that it didn't meet our requirements, being metal. But by them providing or looking at a different design, meaning a TimberTech railing with, half-inch, 1-inch balusters, whatever the code would require, they wouldn't have to come back to us. They could just go directly to Christina and have it approved. I mean, because that would meet the requirement. So I don't want to put the applicant through a whole lot of work, but that's why I'm saying, potentially we could continue this, let the applicant look at that type of design and see if that would meet. I know it's not going to be exactly what they want. It might meet their needs, and it will meet our concerns as well. So I think that would be a step forward there, and then should they choose to go that way, they could get it approved and wouldn't have to come back to us at all.
I just wonder, is that how that works, Christina, with the record being open if we continue it?
Sure, the record will stay open. You can just continue it. The record will stay open. The applicant can provide additional analysis. At any time, the applicant can withdraw their application. The applicant can also continue to move forward in September for a final decision.
So I guess I would make a motion then for continuance to date certain of September, 26th, with for the opportunity applicant to present alternatives or a more compelling reason why that particular design to be approved.
I'll second that.
All right. Chairmember Powell?
Aye.
Chairmember Stobie?
Aye.
Chairmember Green?
Aye.
Board Member Green. And Chair Barry. 8:40. Okay, motion carries. Okay. So Kim, I can speak with you later this week and you can talk about your options and next steps.
Okay, sounds good, Christina. Thank you.
All right.
I think we had one more thing.
All right. So the next item is the biannual work plan. I think a lot of the boards and commissions are trying to realign their work plans to the biennium rather than the calendar year. And in our July meeting, I provided some list of previous goals that the board had. And we were going to hold off till we had our camp meeting, which was our the National Association of Preservation Commissions had a training, so we can also use this time to debrief on that. I know Board Member Green had some ideas for an additional item to potentially be added to our work plan. So I can share my screen, or we can have a little bit more of a free-flowing discussion. But I think beyond the normal ongoing education, such as the Preservation Month and homeowners packet, and then any future, trainings that this board may want to have through the National Association of Preservation Commissions. They have online webinars that are free for members, and the Oregon City is now a member. So that's something I can coordinate where HRB members can watch webinars. There's two items that was on previous commission or board's goals and policies, which was the compatible change, which was an outreach process that has yet to be completed, looking at the definition of new construction and the McLoughlin Conservation District of when things trigger review by the Historic Review Board for additions to non-designated structures, and additional education on windows, specifically helping to write kind of a default windows condition of approval for new construction and even additions that could be added that have a lot more details. So those are kind of the two goals that came from years past that I've added on to this. So the board can choose to continue that, add on to it, but more importantly, staff is looking for prioritization of work plan items, knowing that I can't do everything at once. So, and we don't necessarily have staff capacity for consultant time. So we'll be looking at new certified local government grants coming up in for starting next summer for 2 years. So based on your goals and priorities, I can take a look at what grant opportunities may be available. So I'll pass it back to the board to maybe do a little debrief on what you learned from camp, which was already on our goal. So congratulations, you already met and completed a goal. I say keep it on there so you can check off a box before we even start. But you can talk a little bit about what you learned and then any other items you think would be important to add to our work plan.
Well, I will start. As for camp, I thought it was excellent. I really enjoyed. Probably the best part was meeting people from different areas and getting their perspective, especially in our exercise. I found that fascinating. Everybody's got a different idea, and to take our design reviews versus their design reviews, and it brought up a lot of interesting questions that we were able to talk about, which was great. The solar panel discussion was good. I don't know that we came up with an answer for that. I think we got a lot of information, but I still think we need to review that as a board and decide what it is we want to do and make some very specific regulations or rules about that. The other thing I was going to ask, I think the Windows session would be excellent. I'm weak in that environment, and I think it would be great for me anyway to get. I've actually been speaking to some people that do that work for a living just to get some different perspectives. But it would be nice to be able to have a little better understanding of where we want to go as a board with Windows and new windows and replacement windows and vinyl wood clad and all those different things. And then the other thing I wanted to mention was the outreach. I love the fact that we send a document to new historic homeowners. The concern I have about that is it's usually a lot of times it's late in the game because they may have bought the house with an idea of remodeling in mind. And I don't know how to proact that. I mean, we're certainly not going to be able to talk to every realtor in town, but it just seems to me that there should be some, I don't know how we do it. Outreach to outreach to people that are selling these homes, that understand that in a historic district, and maybe it's in the tax code or something. No, well, that's the problem. That's the challenge. I'm done.
I concur with Board Member Powell. I really enjoyed the camp presentation, and it was interesting to me the commonality as well as the differences. When I see that these different jurisdictions are following these same processes, and they may have different guidelines and so forth, but we're not alone in what we're trying to do here, which is good. I did come away with a good appreciation of what we are doing in our community, in that some of the communities don't really have a board per se. Their commissioners deal with it or whatever, and they have some regulations and guidelines and so forth. But I think we're fortunate in having, you might say, the tools that we as volunteers need to work with. So it was interesting, and I would concur also that the window discussion is probably a good priority. We may bump up against that. The publication or notification of the public, that one's been discussed, and like Board Member Powell mentioned, that it would be ideal to get to the public before they make their purchase, but how that is possible, it just probably is not. The mailings and those communications are excellent, and I think those are important in view of making people aware. And I don't know, we could have a discussion, I guess, about if there was something that periodically went out to historic districts that might be too costly. I don't know. But what we have seen in Kanema, and it probably has happened in McLoughlin and with standalone projects as well, is people launch into something innocently, not trying to duck, the rules, but just unaware that no, you're supposed to get approval for that before you make these exterior modifications or whatever, and they feel blindsided, and any ideas that we can come up with. So that's certainly worth some discussion of realistic ways of making that aware. And it may be something that could be incorporated in the Oregon City website, something that is a little bit closer to the homepage or whatever, to put people, bring people's attention to the fact that if you're dealing with historic property in a historic district, you may be, you need to check on what the requirements are, without it seeming, to be combative. I'm very sensitive to the fact that the potential adversarial climate that can be generated very readily, and we don't want to do that. So it needs to be clear and available without being daunting and so forth. So yeah, there's certainly some discussion in that area, I think.
Board Member Green, you had sent an email with some ideas, and one thing I thought was interesting was at a kind of a intra-city communication process to better track conditions of approval through the building permit process and back to the applicants. And that, some ideas of just how to make sure once a land use application is approved that the applicant truly understands the conditions and implements them through the process. Some of the conditions don't require building permit, and they, we review at the end of the process, and sometimes projects change hands, and, things aren't always linear. But I was curious if the board also thought looking at permitting communications as a potential work plan item.
I think it's a great idea.
Didn't know if board member Stobie or Ferry.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Oh, sure. It was kind of like creating action steps to better coordinate conditions of approval through the building permit process, both through interdepartmentally, but also with the applicant, to make sure that conditions aren't, maybe the applicant may not understand the condition, or the coordinating of like really what it means to implement that condition.
I see.
Yeah, I'm not sure if the other board members have all seen that email, but just in summary, the concerns that kind of have been in the back of my mind, that in part prompted me to step up, you might say, to participate, was just some things that I observed that communication breakdown, then comes back and bites, and it causes problems for the applicant and the board and staff. So anytime that can be resolved, and specifically the ones that that concerned me was that the approved plans actually, the condition of approval that the HRB decides on a project, that those conditions of approval actually appear on the approved plans, not just as a packet attached, which typically gets torn off or falls off and disappears. And it is the responsibility of the applicant, obviously, to monitor those, but then in the construction phase, it gets overlooked if it's not clearly there on the approved plan. It's a little bit analogous, and Chair Ferry, you'd be aware of this, but like engineering details that go along with a plan, they'll come out in a packet and will be attached with all the calculations and so forth. But the engineering details that have to be implemented also have to be part of the approved plan, not just the attached packet. And so that step of communication, I think, would be an important one, so that when the approved plans go out, whatever conditions of approval, let's say 6-inch smooth fiber cement siding, either the plans show that, or it's redlined at before it goes out as an approved plan to notate that. And the other thing that I thought might be helpful would be to just simply have a stamp that gets stamped on the approved plans, much as some of the other stamps that they use in final plan check. Just HRB COA, HRB condition approval. So a siding designation or a column designation as part of condition of approval gets stamped with a stamp. So somebody looks at that, hey, what's this about? This is the condition of approval. We can't substitute and do a different siding type here that a subcontractor might do, without, just get textured siding instead of smooth. Think, well, hey, we got to order the smooth, and it's going to take a week and a half to get it. Let's just get the textured. But if that's right on the stamp plan, carrying that communication a little further, seems like it would be important.
And that, I think adding investigating action items is something I can very, very reasonably do. And we do a lot. Most of our plan review is electronic now, so red lines are a lot easier to add to plans.
Mm-hmm. I like that idea. I know I've talked to this, the issue of outreach is come up many times over my tenure on this board. And no matter how much outreach we do, whether it's, with buyers and sellers and realtors, there's always a hole that we just can't seem to plug up with or how we do it. But I've always thought, I think it was Tim, you had mentioned you try to get somewhere in the beginning to where before the transaction before the home is sold and new owners take place or take ownership of that house. And I've always thought, why have we ever looked at how can it be done through the deed and a preliminary report?
And the problem with the deed is it takes owner consent to record against a deed, and we have 500 and so property owners, and you're rarely going to get a property owner willing to consent to the city to record a document against them.
Because I've always thought, is there, when a home is put into a historic designation, that should be key.
Sure. We just haven't had any new ones since probably 1996. So we're working on existing stock. And so now going back, we would have city to contact and request that to be placed on the deed. And that's 500 and some different owners of designated properties, and they would have to consent to that. And kind of from the conversations I've had year over year, it's usually not something owners want to consent to, the city placing recording a deed paper against them.
But would that still have to happen when ownership changes hands?
Any an owner would have to consent to have something recorded on their deed.
Christine, I'm wondering, I don't want to drag you through the mud too long, but I'm just wondering if maybe the organization that did our class, if they have any history or have any information relating to that kind of a outreach program. So I mean, they go around the country, wondering if there's something. I mean, I don't know if videos that could be presented on cable television or whatever. I don't know, just to get the word out. And maybe it's too vertical of a market, really, to get a big approach. But it seems to me we could answer a lot of questions before they came up, I think.
I think this is a great item we can add. We don't have to solve everything here. This is a work plan. We don't have to solve it. But, for the outreach, I can add an extra bullet that basically says investigate additional outreach opportunities for new property owners. The other thing that we can do, and we have done in years past, and we can use a certified local government grant on it, is we can send just a full-on new homeowners packet or a light version of that to every property owner, and mailing and printing costs can be paid for by the certified local government grant. So we could do another mailing push this grant cycle to all property owners that are designated.
Yeah, it'd be nice to know. I mean, it'd be nice to at least research it if we could.
So just briefly if the other board members haven't had a chance to see the email, a couple other things that I shared in that email that were of concern to me. And one is inspection for compliance with conditions of approval, which typically happens only at building final. And there's been instances where then violations of conditions of approval get caught right at final inspection, and then the applicant is in perhaps a bind. They're trying to close some financing and get their certificate of occupancy and so forth, and they got violations in it. So then they scurry back to the board, and then the board, you might say, is put under pressure to change conditions and so forth. It would be really nice to head that off. And so my thought of a topic of discussion would be if it would be reasonable to look at a midpoint status. Likely would be like a cover inspection during the building process, that there would be just a checklist of conditions of approval. Either they're satisfactorily completed, they're not completed yet, or if they're in violation, then it's caught a little earlier in the game. So that would be one thing I think worth discussing. The other one that has cropped up, and this is relatively specific to Kanema, but the most of the properties in Kanema also have geological hazards overlay, likely have natural resources overlay, and the variety of conditions that have to be satisfied, one impacting the other, and specifically probably geological hazards. What's happened frequently is that a person goes through, hammers out their historic approval. Then when they go through their geological hazard, well, you can't do this, you can do that. Then they're back to the historic review board, and there's a time delay noticing and so forth. So it makes the applications drag out to quite a lengthy. So one consideration I have would be if it would be prudent to have a representative at our HRB meeting, if an applicant is making an application where geological hazards or natural resources would be involved. They would be there, as I see it, in a consultation status, not making approvals or denials, obviously, but guiding us so that we don't say, well, why don't you do this? And then 60 or 90 days later, they find out from building services, no, you can't do that because that's won't comply with geological hazard requirements. If that discussion happens even design and bias phase, or certainly at the phase, it would guide us in, you might say, imposing requirements that they discover that they can't meet. So that might be certainly a discussion to have.
Yeah. Agreed.
Yeah, that is actually compelling and interesting concept. It's just more of we would want to make sure we do it to protect the land use process of geologic hazards and the non-binding comments and things like that with our engineering staff. But that's something we can absolutely put on the action item list to investigate how that could be done effectively.
Wow.
Okay, so this is what I have, and then maybe a conversation of priorities, and then I can write this up for kind of really adoption at the next meeting. But I hear support for windows, especially the infill and new materials, kind of outreach for new homeowners, and potentially periodic outreach to all property owners. But maybe look at different ways we can, and like talk to the National Association of Preservation Commissions and see what other tools in the toolbox they're out there. And I think you're right. It's going to be a scattershot approach to hopefully find as many ways to reach out to property owners, knowing that there's always going to be somebody, but the more we can provide coverage, hopefully we can reduce that. Then we see kind of the 2 points that board member Green brought up, which was better coordination between the city departments and the applicant in regard to conditions of approval. And I can put a punch list of different ways that could happen for action items for that. And then this conversation about checking in, I think it's a little bit connected to the first, but is there a more formal check-in mid-process of a historic project? And then add on to that, how to coordinate geologic hazard review and historic review, knowing that they're going through two parallel processes, but they do talk to each other, but the board isn't engineers and the engineers aren't preservationists. So the applicant has to go through two separate processes, but they are both impacting the final design. So are there kind of tools that we can use to help better coordination? Is there anything else from that list? Plus what we have on the list to add? And then I guess my question is also priorities, knowing that they all can't happen at once.
Well, I'd like to remind you of solar panel
right.
design, and from a my perspective, I think the things we'll be faced with would probably be windows and solar, and I think those should take some priority. I think the outreach is going to take a while, but to Board Member Green's comments, I think that's something that's going to help us long term. So I would say, the windows and the materials infill, and then possibly the solar, and then on to Member Green, and then the last would be outreach, in my mind.
What about compatible change project?
I think probably up there as far as, because we've been working on it, and I feel like we should still continue with it, right?
Yeah. I that should be up on the list. I think I agree. I missed it in my notes here. So yeah, I would say that would be up because it has been an ongoing issue.
It's ongoing, and it's what triggers review, right? So things could slip through if we don't change.
So just to give you level of effort on my end, the windows is definitely Kelly Reed envisioned a certified local government grant to get an expert in to help with the conversations and craft that. So that probably would happen later next summer when we were able to obtain grant monies from this new grant. The outreach to property owners, the toolbox, learning other things can kind of be updates throughout the year, but most likely additional monies for mailings. For if we went to all property owners, would probably happen through that next certified local government grant. So next summer, but kind of initial work can happen this year to see what other tools are in the toolbox.
Could we talk to neighborhood associations? I feel like
yeah. So I think things that aren't noticed, large scale mailings would happen next year, or at least a year from now. But we can work on items that don't involve large scale mailings. The inspection and building, that's an ongoing thing I can work on with our departments and come up with action items over this next year as kind of a update to the board and communications. The midpoint checklist and bringing engineering staff is a lot more complicated because it's adding probably an inspection fee or a meeting. This is more staff time. So I'd have to have a more formal conversation with our directors to see what that entailed. And that would be a specific action item we'd bring back to the board on its own as a policy question. And then solar panels, really what I'm hearing is the Historic Review Board went through a solar panel update to the HRB policies. And with more information from the camp, the Oregon City is not too far off from where we were hearing that Denver was going, and some of the conversations about solar panels in the next 20 years. So it could be a work plan item can just be revisit solar policy number X of the HRB policies. And if there are additional items the board wants to allow on a staff level review, such as Denver move forward to allow solar panels on street facing facades if the applicant can show through their solar study that was the only option. So that's one thing that Denver now allows on a staff level. And today that you do go in front of the board for that and you show your solar study and you make that case. So that's one of the conversations that the board could look at as a potential amendment to the policy. So if it's okay with the board, I can write all up the additions, and then what I can have a conversation with Aquila, Herd Ravager Community Development Director, about level of effort and what I think we can kind of what things take less level of effort and more level of effort, or what things would be more associated with a certified local government grant, to look at how this work plan can be phased over the next 2 years, and then kind of come back to you in September with concurrence, or no, we want, this is more important, so push this up and put these other level of efforts lower because this is something we want to move forward on. Would that work for the board?
That sounds good to me. I think that, I think there's obvious value in trying to get low hanging fruit for one thing, or complete things that are already in play. And so if you come back with, you might say, what's achievable readily, a work session on solar panels, and we can put that one to rest maybe, or whatever, and see if we can get the low-hanging fruit first. That seems to make sense.
Mm-hmm. The one item I think that's going to take the most level of effort on staff levels is the compatible change, just because it's been a year since the last outreach, and it's going to be basically reopening those conversations and bringing them back to the board. So that is probably something to have to plan out to figure out what the next steps and level of effort are for that, as well as the conversation about the midpoint inspection and historic review board with engineering staff. Other pieces I think are more readily actionable this next year, and can be done, over a course of several work sessions.
Great.
All right. Well, with that, I'll come back and write this all up for September.
Okay.
Well, I'd like to say before we leave, I want to thank you, Christina, for getting that training set up so quickly. It was really beneficial, and I really appreciate it. And I also want to make a note, after talking to some of the people that were there, we are very, very lucky to have you, because you have a very strong background, and I think you do a lot of work for us that other people don't get that opportunity. So I very much appreciate you for all you do, and I want to thank you for that.
Oh,
And I
Thank you.
Yep.
Well, I also really appreciated the camp, and as always, so nice to hear from everybody else and know that we fit within the general context. So,
Yep.
We just need to be confident in how we view our policies, and it can change. We don't have to, we can evolve, but we can also be confident that how we are implementing our circuit review board program is well within the realms of, HRB policies, or HRB, the construct of historic preservation.
Yep. Agreed.
And Paula had her hand raised and put down.
No, I think she was applauding.
I was, yes, I was applauding Christina.
Okay.
All right.
All right, so should we conclude the meeting? All right. So we now conclude the August 22nd, 2023 meeting of the Historic Review Board. Thank you, everyone.
Everyone have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.